So, it's been a minute, give or take a year and a half, but here's more Shadowrun lore, and today we are going to talk about magic. And just to be clear, this video is not going to be about the gameplay mechanics of how magic works in Shadowrun, but specifically about how it works in the lore. If anything, the magic described in the books with its list of spells and spirits doesn't even encompass a fraction of the magic that can happen in Shadowrun. But then, that is a rather common design approach. Magic is the defining characteristic that makes Shadowrun different from other cyberpunk settings. Yes, everything is a hyper-commercialized capitalist dystopia, but also everything transcendental or spiritual that might give people hope in the supernatural or a higher power is also focus tested, packaged, and sold on supermarket shelves. Magic returned to the world around the year 2012, which is a cyclical event that marks the passage of one world into the next. World here basically meaning era. And you can imagine that being a society where magic doesn't exist, or being a society that relies on magic, both of them would experience this change of state as a major cataclysm. This time it was the change from the 5th world to the 6th world, and magic existed previously in the 4th world and the 2nd world. All of the worlds that have even numbers had magic. But also, even during the eras of the odd ones, such as the 5th world, the magic never really fully went away. You see, magic in Shadowrun manifests from a place called the astral plane. And this astral plane is not an even spread of butter on the sandwich of the world. It has its own geography, its own quirks, features, fluctuations. Even during the 5th world, in a few times and places, magic occurred. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Never consistently or predictably in any way. However, due to how impactful and extraordinary those events were, they did play a major role in shaping human culture. The difference doesn't even really lie in the astral plane, because if you want to get very serious about the particulars of magical theory, the astral plane isn't a place that exists. Instead, it is a dimension created by the overlap of the physical real world with the so-called metaplanes. It's a magical in-between space that exists because in the 6th world and all of the even world numbers, the metaplanes sort of move in closer to the physical plane. So there's more overlap and more astral plane and more magic. Metaplanes are numerous and mysterious. We actually know very little about them, just that some of the closer by ones gave us concepts like the Feywild or Hell. When people talk about the amount of magic in the world increasing over time since the magic returned as such, like there's a sharp increase in the amount of increase, which is measured in background count, what they're really saying is that the metaplanes are moving in closer with the physical world. This is a problem because the metaplanes are inhabited by spirits, and some of the more fucked up spirits exists on the outer metaplanes. This is why, for instance, the insect spirits didn't start appearing until the 2050s, and why the Shadim didn't start appearing until the 2060s. Also, and this is true, the Shadim are just less interesting insect spirits. That's what they are, just straight up. Come up with some more interesting ideas. So as time moves on, more and more weird eldritch entities are going to come to Earth, but also our magic is gonna get stronger. Spirits are a foundational concept of Shadowrun magic. Most magic relies on spirits in some capacity, either because the practitioner is drawing upon their power or just straight up summoning them to do their bidding. Spirits from certain planes, like nature spirits or spirits of man, aka civilization, are so close to the physical plane that they can often be found just hanging out on the astral, especially in places that represent the things that their metaplanes are made of. Not because they couldn't exist anywhere else, but because, they're comfortable there. So you might find a water spirit in a pond or a fire spirit in a bonfire. While on the astral plane, spirits only have a limited capacity to interact with the world. Especially if they're surrounded by non-magical things, they might even feel somewhat trapped and uncomfortable. But if there are awakened things around that have a dual dual existence in both the physical world and the astral plane, which is true about magic users, but also a lot of plants and animals, they can work through those. But if given a little help, spirits can manifest in the real physical world, though rumor has it that a few of them can actually do that without help. What these spirits then look like can vary greatly. Not only are there countless different types of spirit related to various different concepts originating in various different metaplanes, but they will also change their appearance depending on who is summoning them. An earth spirit summoned by like a traditional wizard with a pointy hat might appear as like a big rocky golem-like humanoid that has sort of Enochian, Nordic, or Chinese runes emblazoned on it. If summoned by a dedicated shaman of the natural world, it might appear as a giant mole with glowing eyes, maybe made of mud if summoned in a bog, maybe covered in vines if summoned in a jungle, or maybe it's a bison or a rabbit. It depends heavily on the circumstances of the spirit, the summoning, and the preconceptions of the person doing the summoning. The same individual spirit summoned by two different people is going to look very different. Spirits generally tend to have their own agendas, which is often just sort of like hanging out and chilling. But they will work with spellcasters if they are given offerings or bound against their will. Most spirits that you'll run into are this. They are summoned to perform a certain set of tasks for the person summoning them, and then they're sort of like dismissed or put away in storage, essentially, on the astral plane. There's also, as a little bit of a side note, free spirits, which puzzled scholars of magic in that they don't entirely understand how and why they exist in the world without having been summoned or bound in any way. Though there are a lot of good theories on what that might be, nobody really knows. Some spirits are classified as mentor spirits. These are often particularly powerful spirits with their own distinct personalities that spellcasters develop individual relationships with and draw power from them, and sometimes even advice. Put it in terms of the dreaded Dungeons and Dragons, they're basically warlock patrons or cleric deities. The most common by far are the so-called animal spirits, like bear, eagle, or dolphin, but there's also more conceptual ones that are not entirely uncommon, like mountain, the seducer, or the dragon slayer. Even here, the individual identity of the spellcaster will play a major role in shaping how they perceive the spirit and how that spirit appears to them. Though, of course, given their prominence in society, their influence on the world also shapes the spellcaster's expectations of them in turn. Depending on their culture and tradition, the individual shaman dedicated to the Dragon Slayer might see it as the Archangel Michael, as Balder, or Erlang Shen. The aesthetics and details differ, but it is fundamentally always an incarnation of the same spirit. But speaking of powerful spirits and how they relate to humans, what is the relationship that human civilization has to magic? Well, almost everyone who isn't chromed up to the gills has some level of connection to the astral. Even as a non-wizard, you can sometimes sort of feel the presence of spirits and magic, like it's a shiver running down your spine, or a vague shimmer that you can't really see. It's in front of you, but also sort of out of the corner of your eye. Even if you can't sense on the astral plane, you can tell a lot about what's going on by just these sensory impressions. However, most people do not arrive at the correct conclusions because magic is an incredibly broad and diverse subject matter, full of mysterious and arcane knowledge reserved for a very select group in society. Much like most people are aware that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, most people are aware that there is such a thing as the astral and spirits. And also, much like most people are not aware of what the Aharonov-Bohm effect in quantum mechanics is, they also don't know the precise equations used to calculate the ley line power coefficients in arcane circles made of certain materials depending on the angular spokes. Most magic happens on the astral, so it's invisible to the average person, and thus the average person either drastically overestimates or underestimates the amount of stuff that's going on there. But most of the effects that actually affect the physical world you are going to be able to see and feel too when the mage with the somewhat deranged look in his eye burns you to a crisp because he is of the opinion that you have been hitting on his girlfriend. Look, the actual people who can do magic as such are not a lot, and many of them let it get to their heads. Not to mention that not only does your soul get changed by the very act of performing magic, but as dual beings that exist partially on the astral plane, spellcasters and mages in general are much more susceptible to being affected by the spirit entities that dwell there. Whereas regular people, who also have plenty of essence, it's so unrealized, fleeting, and non-concrete that evil spirits have a hard time grabbing a hold of it. Essence, by the way, is also the reason why it's a terrible idea for wizards to get cybernetic implants. If you want to do magic, you need high essence, and if you replace parts of your body, also your soul, with chrome, you lose that connection to the supernatural. Much like being an orc runs in the family, so does being able to do magic. Thus, there are some very, very powerful dynasties of practitioners around the world. But essentially, Muggle-born mages also exist, and I'm not entirely clear on the numbers, but I am pretty sure that they actually make up the majority of the magically awakened metahuman population. And even though the most common type of player character that can do magic is like a full proper mage, the majority of mages are actually so-called aspected mages who can only do a particular kind of magic. Which is fair enough, really, because there are so many avenues of magic and places to get into with your studies that even full mages rarely have the time to attain true mastery over more than one school of magic. Most mages, though, even the aspected ones, have some means of perceiving the astral plane in a manner that is relevant to them. And it is a skill to perceive on the astral, especially if you are fully in there. You can learn a lot of information there. It's great for scouting and infiltration. You can sense particular objects to learn about their qualities without even having to physically touch them. Just be careful when you try to do that on the corporate lab, because the security people at the corporate lab know that you can do it, and they're going to have some watchers around. Spellcasters fall into broad categories, though if we're honest, it's more of a spectrum with a bimodal distribution. The distinction is also more aesthetic and philosophical than technical. On one hand, you have the Hermetics, traditional fantasy wizards and magical occultists who organize in secretive guilds and societies and have access to vast arcane libraries of big tomes of knowledge. They represent the scientific approach to magic that is formalized and standardized and supported by a large commercial infrastructure. Very popular with corporations because they're very like academic research, they're very institutionalized, they're very know who you know. It's quantifiable magic done in a predictable way. It doesn't really concern itself with the moods and feelings of spirits. Hermetics see magic as a tool to be used. Even spirits, intelligent as though they may be, and all reagents are just ingredients in their recipes. Any spiritualism is entirely discarded. Hermeticism is pragmatic, results-oriented, and efficient. Shamans see magic as an essential part of nature, a powerful, intelligent spiritual force that may be called upon by individuals to aid them. Its traditions are ancient, diverse, and highly idiosyncratic. It's often laden with some sort of particular cultural aesthetic, whereas Hermeticism doesn't really concern itself with that kind of baggage when adapting spells. A Norse shaman and a Native American shaman are both shamans. What they do is essentially the same, but the way that they do it looks very different, and some might assume that they're doing entirely different schools of magic. The main philosophical difference is that to shamans, spirits are not just tools to be wielded. They are intelligent, venerable entities that need to be respected and can be learned from. And yes, this does mean that shamans are like 1,000 times more likely than hermetics to have a mentor spirit. As a matter of fact, it's pretty safe to say that almost all shamans have one of those. Instead of binding spirits and forcing them to do their bidding, shamans give offerings to convince those spirits to do the tasks that they need done, which may require a little bit more work, but also comes with the distinct advantage that the spirit is not going to be looking for the tiniest loophole and fuck you over massively from having made a single misstep in the process of binding it. Shamanism as a magical tradition re-emerged rather quickly after magic returned to the world because it's more authentically tied to genuine belief in the supernatural, whereas Hermeticism only now has significant libraries of lore to fall back onto. But no matter where on the spectrum you fall on, you are still a spellcasting mage using your inherent abilities to manipulate mana on the astral plane. The power to do magic comes from the person doing the magic. The traditions are mainly sort of mental shorthands that allow mages to create the effects that they're trying to create easily and intuitively, whether that be, specific formulas that have been figured out or cultural ideas and practices that are associated with a genuine belief in one's own powers. But there is another spectrum of magic, and that is the spectrum of spellcasters versus adepts. While spellcasters use magic to alter the world around them, adepts use it to alter themselves and augment their abilities. Basically, they are the key-powered martial arts masters from the most egregious kung fu movies. They have little use for cosmology or magical theory. Their grasp of the essence is intuitive, which to some makes them sort of second-class mages, which is a mistake that you tend to only be able to make like once. You don't get a second chance to do that. Because can you really be second class to anyone if you're a fucking ninja or one of the gun-kata masters from the movie Equilibrium? Because those also exist in Shadowrun. There is in fact a small minority of adepts that channels their magic into augmenting inherent abilities that are not like cool martial arts skills, which is why the cool martial arts skill type adepts are called key adepts or physical adepts. There are also, and these are very scary, social adepts, which channel their mana into an increased ability for like animal magnetism, become better at persuasion, have a greater presence, are better at seduction, subterfuge, interrogation even. Usually being an adept and a spellcaster is actually mutually exclusive because it's a fundamentally different way of relating to mana. But there are a few that live with a foot in both worlds. Very versatile, but also cursed to never truly attain mastery of any discipline. Adept society is also distinct from the society of spellcasters, which are usually a lot more closed off and secretive. Many of the adept groups where they congregate, which are for instance very often martial arts dojos, can also in theory be joined by people who are not adepts. They do parallel spellcaster societies though in many ways, like the dojos sort of mirroring the concept of circles and coteries, different philosophies being different schools of magic. They use hermetic enchantments for charms to further augment their powers, and there are quite a few adepts who actually have a mentor spirit. I might have dreamed this, but I am convinced it's a thing in Shadowrun lore. I've just been completely unable to find a reference to it in the process of doing research for this video, but I'm sure there is like a military order in Hawaii of adept combat divers that have taken Shark as their mentor spirit. Something that isn't magic, even though a lot of people assume it is technomancy. It is a thing in Shadowrun, but it just is not magic. It has nothing to do with the astral or the arcane or essence or whatever, and it is actually legitimately mutually exclusive with magical abilities, although let's be honest, it's really kind of just hacking using the magic rules. As I alluded to earlier, having access to this much supernatural power can fuck you up. And when that happens, there's a good to fair chance that you will become a big problem. One of the less terrible things that can happen to you is that you burn out, which sounds very bad, but is only moderately bad because it's you essentially turning your back on magic. There are many reasons why one would at least partially partially dissociate oneself from magic. Chief among them is that you pissed off the wrong spirit, and now you really need to replace parts of your body with cyberware, getting rid of those parts of your soul, lowering your essence, so that spirit, which is on the astral, can no longer grab a hold of you. Burned out mages are definitely less powerful in terms of the magic that they can cast, but they have the advantage of being able to have some very unique combinations of powers that are only possible through cyberware, which of course most mages desperately avoid. Burnt out mages are also uniquely suited to fighting mages who have gone bad, as it were, because not only do they still have access to some level of magic, they're also less susceptible to its effects because they have less essence and they have a lot of theoretical knowledge about it. Because those mages gone bad, also known as mages who engage in maleficium, are fucking scary. Blood mages are hermetics gone bad. They are not, unfortunately, mages that, control blood, though that is possible within Shadowrun. Essentially what they do is they take blood and burn the essence therein to massively augment the power of their spells. And if you don't want to destroy yourself in the process, that's going to require a lot of killing and human sacrifice. Famously, pretty much the entire leadership of Advanced Technology is blood mages. It's not something that they write on their billboards, of course, it's just something that everybody kind of knows. Like we all kind of know that Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. Toxic shamans are, well, maybe the least bad of all of them. They're not all 100% ruthless psychopaths, really, is the main thing. They are shamans that, instead of embodying the noble qualities of their mentor spirit, embody the dark and not so good negative qualities that we associate with that spirit, and very often that means they're actually worshipping a different mentor spirit. Look, spirits are complicated and mutable beyond human understanding. Sometimes it's also the same one, sometimes it's just, there's different spirits that are only toxic spirits. For instance, a dog shaman will no longer be an example of loyalty, camaraderie, and kindness, but a rabid hunter-killer that needs to own and dominate everything. The general theme of toxic shamans, though, is that they are dedicated to engaging in some form of destruction. Do note that insect shamans are not the same as toxic shamans, though they will be visited more urgently by a larger high-threat response team. Twisted adepts are sometimes a little less obvious, but no less dangerous. They're often sadists who enjoy pain, both inflicting and often even receiving it, which can make them exceptionally difficult to take down. Because their magic is focused inward, they don't so much mutate their surroundings as they mutate themselves, often into absolutely horrid creatures that become more and more bestial in very, very strange ways as they lose their humanity. Now, you may have already guessed this, but all of these categories too are kind of sort of a little bit on spectrums. You can do a little bit of blood magic, you can do a lot of blood magic. It's not just limited to hermetics either. Shamans can also augment the power of their spells with blood, and they can even summon blood spirits. Hermetic mages without a mentor spirit can also come to be perceived as toxic. It really mainly depends on what you do with your magic. There are also some spirits representing insects, like for instance the honeybee, which isn't an insect spirit though, because insect spirits are a particular kind of thing that is very, very bad. And there are even a certain kind of insect spirit, the totem of mantis, that is not necessarily tolerated, but often conveniently ignored as a useful pest because most of what it does is fuck up other insect spirits. And technically speaking, even someone who uses rage to channel their ki is a little bit twisted. When you're a mage, there's a lot of dark spirits and fucked up traumatic life events just waiting to send you on a dark path. That is why, no matter what kind of mage you are, the government wants a say, and so do the megacorporations. There are very few places in the world where magic is relatively unregulated, and pretty much all of them are that way because they are generally unregulated, anarchic societies with no rules and a lot of bloodshed. Not only is it objectively a powerful force that gives individuals a lot of agency that maybe necessarily some people shouldn't have, but also when it first came back into the world, there may or may not have been a little bit of panic and over legislation, even in relation to how powerful magic is. And though there has been liberalization of that in most places as society has accepted the usefulness of magic, the fundamental structures of the initial legislation that happened are still present. Pretty much everywhere you have to register as a wizard, it's going to be on your SIN, so every time the authorities check your identity, they know you're a spellcaster. Maybe they even know what kind of spellcaster you are. Exactly how regulated magic actually is depends on the individual jurisdiction and your personal status. There are places where basically you need to get a permit for every single spell that you might want to cast. In other places, you need licenses to do certain types of magic. You need to register that you know this particular spell and how to do it. You might need permits to do magic on particular times of the day or in particular areas. Of course, in the shadows, where you are a mercenary that's kind of leading an illegal existence anyway, all of that doesn't really matter that much. It really mainly applies if you are some kind of wage mage, aka a spellcaster working for a corporation. Which, let's be fair, if you can do magic, you are set career-wise. Any sort of magical ability is so rare that even with mediocre talent, you can make a decent living working as a prized asset for one of the big corps. Because money is more powerful than magic. Shops selling magical paraphernalia, also known as talismongers, also require licenses. And wouldn't you know it, in most places the way that licensing works, just for some reason, sort of advantages, perhaps, maybe, all of the big chain stores like Mageworks or Pentacles or Law Stores Inc. over like independent suppliers. The main things that talismongers sell relate to your magical lodge, so they sell mainly reagents and foci, which your magical lodge is basically your wizarding workshop. Different traditions call it by different words, but it's the same thing. It's a room somewhere, hopefully in your house if you have one of those, where you keep all your magic stuff and you do a lot of the magic that you do. You have the power circles in the ground, you have the dream catchers on the window. It really depends on your particular tradition how exactly it looks. And even if you cast a spell in the field, some labor that went into that spell will have happened in your lodge. If you want to do magic, you need a lodge. A key component in spells is reagents, which can be tricky because they can be pretty much anything. Because mana flows freely and abundantly through the astral plane, it sometimes accumulates in certain particular objects that have a natural predilection for accumulating that kind of mana, or have been given particular meaning by people. You can find them in places with particularly high background count, places where a lot of positive or negative tragic emotions were found, but ultimately you can find of kind of anywhere. The charge will deplete over time, and it can be altered if you expose it to storage conditions that aren't fit for it, like if you have a lust-charged sex doll and you bring it to a monastery, it's gonna degrade pretty quickly. This means that reagents are perishable and also not very easy to universally manufacture. The primary reason for which is, like, ethics. Sometimes you need a reagent that is packed with a lot of, like, pain, agony type mana. Maybe you need it to create, like, a painkiller potion for medical patients. How do you make that shit? If not by setting up some Himalayan salt lamps about a place where you're torturing a motherfucker. And yes, the corporations are ruthless, but even in the sixth world, there comes a point where cruelty just becomes sort of impractical and detrimental to the bottom line. Another complicating factor is that the reagents that will be useful to you depend on your tradition. Hermetics like their metals, crystals, and text fragments, and shamans like their feathers and little stones and sort of tree branches. So this means reagents are rather common, but they are a massive logistical nightmare to get to the right people. A lot of wizards prefer to scavenge, or as they say, harvest reagents themselves. A necromancer with the best of intentions, don't judge, may be walking around the cemetery to pick off the flowers from your dear departed grandmother's grave, which of course you might very rightfully so find a little bit irritating. This has also led to a little bit of a reputation for mages, especially street mages that like want to buy weird shit off of you. And really that hobo that's like rummaging around the big trash cans behind the stuffer shack, not looking for food, it's a mage. He's actually looking for the particular soy calf cup that he saw someone crying into through the window earlier. As diverse as they are, all reagents are compared to the mighty orichalcum. In fact, they are measured in it. Orichalcum is a magical metal, the purest of all reagents that sort of grows into the physical world from the astral plane. The companion piece to reagents are foci, items that help you empower and channel your magic, like for instance the classic all-star, the magic wand. Other popular classics include crystal orbs, rings of power, ornate bracelets, gorgeous diadems that you can wear on your head. But really, a magical focus can be anything. You could turn an empty beer bottle into a magical focus if you wanted to. Adepts often have tattoos done with magical ink as their focus. But usually people like to keep them aesthetically in line with their tradition. The purpose of a focus is to augment your magical feats. Most foci are something that is attuned to a particular user in order to help them cast a certain kind of spell better, whether that be more quickly, more powerfully, more efficiently, or all of the above. Unlike reagents, foci are willfully shaped items that have a permanent dual existence alongside a shape in the astral space. They don't degrade over time unless they are specifically fucked with. Most of the foci that talismongers sell off the shelf are like my first magic wand type stuff for beginning mages, or maybe something that boosts you into a certain category of spell that you have to do for a job, but you're not really all that interested in. Over time, as they gain more power and experience, mages will tend to create their own foci that suit their particular needs, or if they don't have the talent or time to do that, they will put in a custom order if they have the Nuyen. And really, that's what it all comes down to in Shadowrun. It's the price tag. Magic is immensely powerful, it's true. It can make you be able to do things that weren't even imaginable a century ago. But it's also dangerous, and not just because of the inherent volatility of wielding such a great power. People distrust it, they're afraid of it, and powerful as though it may be, it does have some hard limits, and the people who are just waiting for permission to snuff out your life know exactly what those are. Sixth world is a dangerous place, chummer. Don't choose poorly now. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, I really have been enjoying doing these longer form videos, especially when it relates to like game lore. So I figured, you know, I should go back to the classics because a lot of people have been asking for it. And see you around, cunts.